Okay, what I want to do is tell you a bit about some software that we've developed so that it can be used as a service by researchers and potentially clinical staff in healthcare settings, but where the data will be used for research. So this is a project led at the University of Leicester in close collaboration with BRISSKit, who are our core funders. And obviously working closely with the National Institute for Health Research. So I'm talking to you about a project led at the University of Leicester. Are we working okay now? Okay. And what we've done is develop around some mature open source software tools, quite widely used in a research setting. I'm holding the mic closer now, so that might work better. And this has very much been led at the University of Leicester with colleagues in the University Hospitals Leicester Trust, and I'll tell you a bit more about what we're doing shortly. We have a stand round the corner if you'd like to see a demonstration of any of the tools that I'm going to be referring to. Okay. So the generic model is that we provide open source software for core generic tasks that very many research and healthcare-based groups need to use to manage their studies and to manage the data underlying their studies. So if you look at, we have essentially, you can think of it as a stack of interlinked open source software. At the top of the stack, we have something called CiviCRM, which has proved to be particularly well suited to managing cohorts of patients for studies and health science-based studies. You can then link the patient records, for example, if you're behind the NHS firewall, to modules which provide management of samples, so it could be blood, urine, and so on. And we use something called Open Specimen. It was called CA Tissue. It's just the community of software developers around it has just voted to change name to Open Specimen, reflecting the broader scope. It originally was about cancer research samples, and now it has a much broader scope. Linked in with that are components. To date, we've concentrated on RedCap and also something called Abiberonics. These components are about electronic data capture, effectively survey data. So very widely, the sorts of tools, the functionality of the tools is very, very much used for survey questionnaire data across the health sciences in many studies. Now all of these are linked, and what BRISSKit does is bring these mature open source components and integrate them using web services. So when you update a record about a patient in one component, that will be reflected in the data sets and the views of the data that you have in your questionnaire and sample tools also. Now all of these are then grouped together in a data warehousing and querying tool called I2B2. And I2B2 can also be used to perform new queries and to pull in data from publicly held data sets to combine them using standards, ontologies, and so on, combine them with your own data. And then you can start to do really exciting things. This original model was built out of the NIHR-funded cardiovascular biomedical research unit at Leicester. And what they had to do in particular was manage samples and barcode those samples. But then we have researchers based on the university side who need to be able to access anonymized versions of those data sets. And so we have a particular technique. This will vary on your use case, of course, but we can help with that. But there are various ways in which you can anonymize, pseudonymize data so that it can be collected and queried on the university side effectively. Now all of these components are built using fairly standard VMware type, but alternatives are available, infrastructure basically to spin up virtual machines. All this means to the user, many of our users might be nursing staff in a hospital, for example, in that they import data with patients who consent to do so. They just have a web front end, and if they are logged in, authenticated on the hospital side, they can record with the patient's consent real answers to real questions about their family history and so on. And you can then link that in with blood, urine. You have your questionnaire data. You can link to patient records via Civi CRM. So all of these things linked together is what's sort of unique about what we offer, and we've integrated these components in a way that makes it scalable and reproducible. It can be hosted easily in a university data center, a hospital data center, but very much it can be hosted on a cloud platform as well, if that's the appropriate requirement for a given project. It's adaptable. That's the beauty of the open source. From the researcher point of view, the more technically minded researcher can get at the open source components and they can tailor them for their own purposes. This is what most researchers do. They need to be able to do that. But we've sort of taken a lot of the hard work out of some of the core integrations between these modules. And we think that that's a model that's appropriate across research and healthcare. There are many, many hundreds of groups who don't have technically minded people, but who need a more sort of managed service offering. So we'll be working with JISC and its partners in the FAR and CRIC and so on to offer these in a sort of scalable way for researchers. So a quick example implementation is shown here. This was actually from the cardiovascular BRU, where you have some pathology data also being included in this stack. It's essentially the same as the previous diagram. I'm going to refer to it as I just show a couple of details about each of the components now. So beginning at the top of the stack, this is Civi CRM for patient cohort management. And this essentially enables you to manage studies. So it enables the end-to-end contact management for volunteers and research participants. Apologies, the font's probably a little bit small to see there. You can track approaches, contacts, responses, recruitment, exclusions, all those useful things. It turns out that this software called Civi CRM, originally built by a community around for example, election campaigns, things like that, so civil movements, particularly in North America. It turns out to be extremely well written for this kind of study management, so we'll be working more and more on adaptations of this that are particularly suited to patient cohorts in an NHS setting. I've mentioned all the various ways you can track approaches and so on. It has an object model, as I say, that reflects that community building approach, and it turns out to be quite appropriate for health science types studies. So in the middle here, our whole architecture is done in an open way that allows you to plug in your own components as well. Again, this is what especially the more technically minded researchers want to be able to do. So the next component is Open Specimen, and this can be used. We've used it in the cancer biobank at Leicester, but it's also in use in the cardiovascular biomedical research unit and also our NIHR-funded respiratory biomedical research unit. This holds data on primary, derived, and aliquot specimens, and can include linear and 2D barcode information. You have storage, inventory, order tracking, links to which freezer where, and so on. And then also in this middle cap is your questionnaire survey component. So if you look at REDCap is probably the most common example of that as far as researchers are concerned. So this, again, is web-based, secure questionnaire data entry by research or nursing staff, used for all patient recruits in the respiratory biomedical research unit. And it allows mobile computing on wards and so on. So it makes it a lot easier for people to actually use. And then finally, coming to the data warehousing and querying end of things, called I2B2. In this way, you can combine data from multiple data sources. You can use multiple ontologies, data dictionaries to combine those. And that allows for flexible and sophisticated searching, cohort discovery and research. A few examples just on the, which again, sorry, apologies for the font size, will be hard to see here, but on the left-hand side here, what we've done is bring in data from GP data, where you have permission. We have CiviCRM demographic data, so age, gender, ethnicity, and so forth, included there. We can demo all of this to you around the corner, by the way, if you'd like to come and have a look afterwards. Then we have HES data here in the middle, so hospital episodes data. You can then link to the open specimen data, cell data, fluid, blood, and so on. And then at the bottom here, you might have an individual study questionnaire responses. You can pull in features, parameters of these data sets into these windows and do a filtered search. So you search by filtered quantity, and then you set the parameter range for that quantity. And as you can see, that therefore allows you to build up quite sophisticated cohort searches. It's the kind of techniques that's used all the time in research these days to build new samples and do new research. And so we've already begun work and are doing more work on how you can link these kinds of data sets using the standard ontologies available. Okay, so to summarize about BRISSKit, its unique selling points are this integrated support for these core processors. We're not trying to reproduce the entire IT requirements for a research group in any way, but what we can do is scale up the integrated support for core tasks that many, many hundreds of biomedical research groups just in the UK, funded in various ways, need to do around those core tasks: patient cohort management, sample management, and so forth, gathering questionnaire data. So BRISSKit offers this platform for seamless management and integration between those applications, and an API so that you can plug things in, other people can plug their stuff in, and we can do likewise. And it's very easy to set up and use, both as an administrator through a browser and for the user, and they can therefore use them on mobile devices. And it's capable of being hosted in any compliant cloud provider, and we'll be working closely with JISC and Janet, the Janet Academic Network, with the people working in that space. And there's some exciting announcements coming out of JISC at the moment regarding partnerships between the FAR Institutes, CRIC, and JISC and others. So we have new funding for 2014 to 16 as a JISC endorsed service. We have users through, for example, the Leicester Cancer Biobank, the Respiratory Biomedical Research Unit in Leicester. But JISC are very much working with us now to build this up to the next level with various national groups who we are already engaged with to some degree, but obviously we wish to build up from how we're working with those groups to offer it much more broadly to UK universities and higher education, potentially through their JISC subscriptions for at least the core parts of what we do, and then if appropriate there may be managed services required on top of that, for example to integrate for their particular use case. We will be developing over the next 6 months the exact form of how we support this, but it's centered around building the community of users. So rather than, I won't dwell on this point now, but we are very interested to work with other interested groups, companies and so forth in partnership as we build this. And coming back finally to the stack here, the first 6 months of the project will have a particular user focus around I2B2. And what we're going to do is offer a public cloud service around I2B2. Users can now get free servers, basically anyone can sign up with Amazon, HP, Azure and so on. And what we're going to do is offer users the possibility to use the tailored version of I2B2 that we've provided, essentially so that they can dial up an instance of I2B2, upload their own clearly public data for this, in this case, into I2B2. Upload will offer an easy way to upload CSV, Excel type files of data. We already have working prototypes for that. And this will allow people to modify those data sets, add ontological data, SNOMED and other standard codes from BioPortal. And you can then perform queries on the data by combining those data sets through I2B2. And what we'd like to do, so an illustration of how you do that is you might take questionnaire data, pull it into I2B2 as I showed before, use a bioontology to match those different data sets. And what we're working towards is we like to think that there's a good case for building a much broader I2B2 NHS community where people volunteer to upload data sets where appropriate into this public cloud area, and then people can combine their own data with those data sets. And what we want to do is encourage the building of a community around that public cloud I2B2 approach, where users can publish, exchange, augment data, and so on. And potentially this will then make it much easier for other users to find these much broader NHS-wide cohorts rather than NHS Trust-specific cohorts. Okay, re-identification, of course, remains with the original sources of the data. So one of the ways we achieve the successes we've had in building this software is through hack events, and here's an example in Leicester. We will be having the next of a new series of events in mid-February. Exact dates will be announced via a mailing list I'll show in a second. We bring together developers, groups, companies, obviously university-based and hospital-based researchers to consider work around particular themes and build new pieces of software. And in the past, we've done some early work on I2B integration with HES data with groups at UCL, Göttingen, Leicester, Birmingham, and so forth. As usual at a hack event, you have people who build smartphone apps. We've also other examples using Civi and so forth. And then finally, there is a broad community around I2B2, and the next European I2B2 community event will be co-hosted in Leicester by ourselves. So we hope to be hacking away in July 2015 on that occasion. To find out more, please visit us at the stand around the corner, and we're happy to give you a demo of any of these bits and pieces of the jigsaw. There's also a newly activated announce list where we'll be providing details of the events I've referred to for hacks and so on. So thank you very much for your time. The details are on this flyer, and happy to take any questions. Oh, thank you.